Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for AIAA Los Angeles section town hall meeting. Today we have a very wonderful program. We started with Dan. Shortly will briefly introduce him. And, his talk will be from 10:30. We'll take a few minutes from him to 12:30. And it happens that and during lunch 12:30. There's a Los Angeles City representative because LA is pushing for employment, fair hiring. So 30 minutes to talk about the new regulation for hiring, and this is something for AIAA we have career and workforce development. So we are trying to help people for your jobs, for ascending in your career or starting a business. So we have been teaming up with local city, El Segundo, Hawthorne, LA City, Torrance, to have a career. This is very important, vital for AIAA. So first of all, I want to thank the Lomita Library for giving us this wonderful meeting room. Then, which you can be here next time. Northrop Grumman become very difficult. Dan actually gave a talk in Northrop Grumman Cafe many years ago before pandemic, but now Northrop Grumman is very difficult to get. So we are still working very hard on that. So maybe David can help us.
Maybe. Sure.
Thank you. Let's first, of course, thank AIAA providing the wonderful Zoom meeting and all the logistics. LA section, our section chair, Luis, he might be here. He said he will be here. And our technical chair, Gary, might be here later this afternoon. It happens that initially we arranged this event with Dan, but then there was another 2 or 3 speakers that loved this day. And since we have the room for the whole day, so you are welcome to stay online and in person here for the lunch talk for the LA City. And also at 1 p.m. there's a talk by Jeff and from Planetary Sunshade. Jeff used to work in Boeing. And Dr. Marty Bradley also used to work in Boeing and now the USC jumper. They are talking about this planetary sunshade to cool the Earth using aerospace engineering. And also Dr. Bradley talked briefly about geoengineering. And afterwards, it happened that there was a newly elected associate fellow at AIAA, Ms. Rachel Tillman. He has aerospace article that his father, Jim Tillman, was on the Viking chief scientist, and she is doing a drive, across the country to promote using Viking preservation, museum, and education. She will talk after the Planetary Sunshade around 2:30. Then Mr. Gary Moore, our technical chair, he's working on the 100 years anniversary of the Wright Flyer right now. But he will probably be back around 2:33, and he might share a little bit about her work, his work in Vikings. Hey, Luis, you said a little bit, and you say a few words before. You want to say a few words?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Luis is our section chair, so would like to welcome you. After you will say a few logistics and the whole talk.
Okay.
You just say boss.
Yeah, right. As far as
It's just the next one.
yeah. Okay. Well, right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hey, thanks for coming today. Very excited about today. Thank you, Ken, for setting this up at the Lomita Library. Got a good lineup of speakers and talks today. So hopefully you guys get a lot of value out of it, as I'm sure I will. As Ken was mentioning about the logistics, there's restrooms in the back, and there's cookies and water, coffee maybe in the kitchen on the left-hand side there.
No coffee.
Oh, no coffee. It's all right. So again, thank you for coming. Welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Later maybe Luis can share a little bit more with you. And in case you are extremely hungry, there's actually the cafeteria, fantastic something cafeteria just across the street. You're welcome. Just walk over and come back. This is a very nice location, huge parking lot, as you can see, nice facility. One thing I want to add to Luis, I think was about, we might take a couple of photos. This meeting is being recorded. Just we might take a few photos for newsletter, website. So if you are concerned, please then let us know, then we can remove your photo. Don't worry about it. Okay, so without further ado, let's start the first session. The speaker is Mr. Dan Adamo. He's our associate fellow, and he's expert in astrodynamics, and he's has been doing very professional work. And he used to be, he will tell you more about this exciting, time in the Johnson Space Center. He was there, a lot of great, activities there. And he recently just published a paper, on this asteroid, why, this 2024, those things. But today's work also based on his publication. Then he's going to tell you something about astrodynamics, and so also very amazing proposal, which will save a lot, for the mission to Mars. And in case you didn't know, Dan actually is very well known. I went to all the other conferences, everybody knew he was proposing, using one of the Mars moon as, the site of landing. He will tell you more about it. Everybody knows Dan. He's very famous. Everybody know about it. So please enjoy the event today. And for young people, I know, please network, afterwards. You can ask advice, for your career. And so please enjoy. Yeah. So all yours. Dan, thank you.
And thank you, Ken, for coordinating this. Really a great opportunity to address the section, if not in person, then at least virtually. You in the LA section, and readers of the LA section's newsletter probably have at least run across some of my articles and hopefully enjoyed them. So I'm going to share my screen at this point and go full screen on my charts. And because I am full screen, I can't see chat windows or anything like that. But I do want to welcome and encourage any questions, particularly if they deal with my nomenclature or anything like that. Please stop me at the earliest possible convenience. And I'm going to rely on Ken or someone else in the room if that's the best way to pull chat, to just interrupt me and read the questions to me. So this research on a new way to get to Mars, particularly with massive human payloads, actually had its inception not far from where you are, at Caltech, at one of the Keck Institute for Space Studies workshops 11 years ago. And it's taken me that long to puzzle it out. And then a little over a year ago, I finally found the time to write some software that would crunch the numbers and come up with reasonably optimized trajectory solutions to solve this problem of the chasm, as I call it, between Earth and Mars. So let me proceed to the first chart and state what I think goes into the chasm, and a little bit of critique on NASA's Moon to Mars roadmap. And this chart here is extracted from this URL down at the bottom of the page. And these are clickable URLs. If you don't have a copy of the charts electronically, feel free to request a copy from Ken or myself. I'm happy to correspond if you have further questions or other inquiries. My email's down at the footer of every chart. Two major critiques with this roadmap graphic. The first one is that it's not to scale. It shows the moon like it's halfway between Earth and Mars. And in reality, Mars is 148 to over 1,000 lunar distances from Earth, depending on how the two planets are phased in their separate orbits around the sun. And then the second critique is what this presentation really relates to. there's nothing but empty space between the moon and Mars. Whereas in reality, there are more than 500 asteroids known to orbit the sun here. What I'd like to first observe is that it's small wonder to me anyway that we've remained about 20 years from landing humans on Mars since Dr. von Braun first addressed the problem in 1948 in his work called Das Mars Project. So, it's, I think, misleading to at least not put a not to scale disclaimer on the roadmap because people that don't really know the solar system well, that may be making important decisions in Congress about funding NASA, they're gonna sooner or later think Mars is easy if it's only twice the moon's distance from Earth. In reality, you're going to be talking about committing astronauts to periods of years at reduced or zero gravity to get to Mars and back to Earth. And so as at least a partial solution to this problem, I am suggesting in this presentation that we add interplanetary waypoints to the Moon to Mars roadmap and reduce travel far from aid or haven as we transit between Earth and Mars, or vice versa. And so waypoints are the new concept I'm going to introduce. And it's based really on a pretty old maxim in transport technology. Difficult problems are decomposed into more tractable stages. So before there were railroads spanning the United States, we had stagecoaches, and they swapped spent horses for fresh ones at strategic depots. And those depots are very analogous to the waypoints proposing in interplanetary space. In the extreme, Missouri to California mail delivery via Pony Express took about 10 days, circa 1860. Really was about the best you could do with horses before the Transcontinental Railroad came in to make travel faster and more reliable, more robust as well. Because it's one thing to transport mail; it's another thing to transport large numbers of people and goods. And we should note too that in the present day, we still don't have a single stage to low Earth orbit capability. It's elusive. Only multi-stage rockets are in use today, even to the lowest practical, stable low Earth orbits. So you have to ask yourself, if we're constantly looking at 20 years down the road, we're going to be putting people on Mars. If it's so difficult and dangerous, why do we insist on flying humans from Earth to Mars nonstop? Let's consider at least placing waypoints in orbit about the sun between the two planets at which to routinely loiter en route, topping off consumables and optionally delivering or supplementing payload mass. In doing so, you actually create, almost by a bootstrap operation, you create an interplanetary commercial system by creating more markets, more stopover points where people can congregate and trade goods. If you just take the simple-minded approach that we're just going between Earth and Mars nonstop and there's nothing but vacuum in between, well, you'll have a similarly curtailed economy in interplanetary space. I'm going to get into how we select the waypoint orbits. There's really just one orbit, but you're going to need 4 waypoints to cover all the transit opportunities. And these orbits are selected so that there's a maximum availability with minimal propulsion. And some of you may be familiar with a related concept that I think is different called cyclers. And the big difference I want you to to have in mind between cyclers and waypoints is that waypoints are circular orbits concentric with Earth, in this application at least. Whereas cyclers supporting Earth-Mars transits tend to cross both planets' orbits so that they look almost like a nonstop trajectory in themselves. But because there are no convenient orbit period resonances to promote reusability of a cycler, those cyclers require major propulsive maneuvers or periodically fortuitous gravity assists from possibly Earth, Mars, or even Venus, and are quite distinct from what I'm advocating here, which naturally allows a given waypoint to be reused every 4.25 years with minimal propulsion. In this study, I actually assumed zero propulsion. And we'll get into some of the implications of that assumption and why it was necessary. So let me pause at this point and ask if there are any questions. Okay, I'll go to the next chart. And here's a little more background information on what we're dealing with here. The observation is that Earth-Mars transit opportunities, unless you've got warp drive, arise when Mars is near opposition. In other words, if you're going from Earth to Mars, you want to depart Earth a little before the opposition and then arrive at Mars a little after the opposition. And the same is true going the other way from Mars to Earth. You want to depart Mars a little before the opposition and arrive Earth a little after the opposition. So an opposition, for those that aren't astronomers in the audience, is like this example here. On the 4th of May, 2031, both Earth and Mars have the same ecliptic longitude, minus 136.6 degrees. And ecliptic longitude is measured in a counterclockwise fashion from the 0 point off to the plus X direction. So you're minus 136, so in the clockwise fashion, minus 136 degrees from that 0 point. Earth and Mars have orbit periods, Earth being in green, Mars being in red, have orbit periods that are 2 months more than 2 years before Earth laps Mars in its lower, faster orbit. And that's called the synodic period tau in my paper and in these charts. And so because we're talking about being 2 divided by 12, 1/6 of an Earth orbit period longer than 2 orbit periods, you wind up advancing 60 degrees in ecliptic longitude from one opposition to the next. So here's the opposition in 2031 when you could be transiting between Earth and Mars. And then the next one is in June 28, 2033. And that occurs at 83.8 degrees, minus 83.8 degrees. So you can see, ooh, this interval isn't exactly 60 degrees. And in fact, it's highly variable as you go around this sequence of oppositions. You can see they cluster in ecliptic longitude along this arc of Mars's orbit, and they're more spread out along this arc of Mars's orbit. And that's because, unlike the Earth's orbit around the sun, which is very circular, you can't really see the difference between a perfect circle and Earth's orbit at the scale. Mars is noticeably elliptical, and that creates all kinds of problems with achieving regular reuse with regular performance in terms of payload delivery and that kind of thing, using waypoints or any other mechanism that you want to reuse your infrastructure as frequently as possible. So you have a need to be in the ballpark, in the vicinity of these opposition ecliptic longitudes every 26 months. But even that 26 months is subject to the qualifier on the average because of these effects that you see with the ellipticity of Mars's orbit, chiefly. Any questions on this? So we go through this sequence of different orbit longitudes. Somebody has a hot mic in the room that just coughed. Anyway, the sequence of orbit longitudes takes 15 years, just a little bit longer than, a little bit longer than 15 years, I think it is, to play out. And thus, a lot of the research that went into proving the viability of waypoints is conducted over this particular 15-year sequence of oppositions, called the Synodic sequence in my terminology, T sub S. Any questions so far? Okay, here's the heart of why the waypoint orbit is selected at the radius that you'll see throughout this presentation. I have in this plot the semi-major axis of an orbit. Mars's orbit has a semi-major axis in astronomical units of a little over 1.5, and Earth's, of course, is 1. And what we're going to plot here is the against that semi-major axis of a potential waypoint orbit is the Earth reference synodic period as expressed in the Earth-Mars synodic periods of 26 months. So we're trying to achieve resonances not with the orbit period of Earth or Mars, but with the synodic period, the tau of Mars with respect to Earth, 26 months. So we want semi-major axes that have a synodic period with respect to Earth that is an even multiplier, an even integer multiplier of 26 months. And so I've normalized the months to synodic periods here on the vertical axis. And of course, if we want to maximize the frequency with which this resonance crops up and enables a waypoint to support an Earth-Mars transit, if we want to maximize that frequency, we need to have a minimum integer number of orbit of synodic periods for the semi-major axis we select. And so 2 is going to be the best we can do. And that is the semi-major axis of about 1.195. So just about AU. So just about 19.5% farther from the sun than the Earth is where we want to locate our waypoints. Any questions about that? This is the fundamental logic behind a waypoint selection.
Yes, actually, one question.
Mm-hmm.
So conceptually, am I correct to understand that the reason for us prioritizing selection of a resonant orbit with specifically with the synodic period is such that if any mission was to arrive to the waypoint or depart from the waypoint, it would then take the minimum amount of time to reach either planet. Is that correct?
Not that so much as that I'm wanting to be able to use the waypoint at a certain opposition, let's say the 2031 opposition, okay? Mm-hmm. And then I want to be able to reuse it as soon as possible. It's not minimizing the transit. In fact, nonstop transits are generally faster. But that's what I'm after, is reuse. And so we'll be able to reuse a waypoint with this 2 synodic period. Mm-hmm. We'll be able to reuse it after two intervals of 26 months or 52 months, just a little over 4 years later. Okay, because we're going to invest a lot in each of these waypoints. I want to recognize that it's certainly on the order of magnitude of what we've invested in International Space Station, for example, in terms of infrastructure and construction and all. So that's the reasoning behind this. And of course, you can pick higher numbers all the way up toward infinity, because at one astronomical unit, you're basically at the same orbit period as the Earth, but maybe phased ahead or behind the Earth in the same orbit. And so your synodic period goes infinite, and that's not going to be a very practical waypoint. And neither is one out of Mars.
It asymptotically then becomes just a direct transit.
Actually, it doesn't transit much anywhere. Think about it. If you're going off to another point in Earth's orbit, you're probably departing Earth in a geocentric parabola and just barely getting out into interplanetary space and not really going anywhere in terms of another planet like Mars, where you want to get out to 1.5 astronomical units.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, let's go and look a little more into just what we're talking about here with this 2-to-1 resonance versus Earth-Mars. So this looks like a busy plot, but it's not too difficult to understand. Once again, we've got just simply time on the horizontal axis. So these are calendar dates here. I've plotted as a function of time the oppositions that fall in this range of dates. So here's the 2031 opposition we talked about, and then 26 months later, here's the 2033 opposition, and 26 months after that, more or less, is the 2035 opposition. So these are the opposition dates. And then what I plot on the vertical axis is simply the clock angle of that polar plot that I showed with the sun at the center. This is the heliocentric ecliptic longitude, the lambda, in degrees, going from -180 to +180. And then what I have are just discrete points occupied by the Earth, Mars, and the waypoint. So you see Earth trundling along here very linearly because it's a reasonably circular orbit. So it sweeps out this heliocentric ecliptic longitude at a constant rate, more or less. And because the waypoint we selected at 1.195 AU is also circular and pretty much concentric with Earth, it has a different slope, but it's also very linear with time. And then finally, Mars is kinky. It's going along and then sort of goes off at a lower slope toward the 180-degree point. And that's because Mars has appreciable eccentricity. And so out here, we aren't cranking out ecliptic longitude at as great a rate as we did down here. And so here we're at the lower rate near aphelion, and down here we're near perihelion, the closest approach of Mars to the sun. And you can see that repeating for Mars with the next orbit and the next orbit. Meanwhile, if you look at all three orbits together, we are looking at a very special case here where at the 2031 opposition date, our waypoint, our prototypical waypoint, has an orbit, a heliocentric ecliptic longitude of -136.6. So it's actually on the Sun, Earth, Mars line at that opposition. So you can see it's a very special case, a simple one to envision because it comes to opposition with Earth and Mars at the same time. So all 3 points at this opposition date are on top of each other. But they rapidly diverge as you go through to the next opposition. And of course, the next opposition, Mars is in opposition with Earth by definition. But look, the waypoint that that was in phase with Earth and Mars at minus 136.6 degrees, it is 180 degrees away at over plus 90 degrees at the next opposition. So it's on the opposite side of the sun from Earth and Mars at that point. And if you let it play out for the full 2 tau, 4.27 years, then you come all back together again. But notice at a totally different ecliptic longitude, which is a good thing because that's where the action is in terms of supporting an Earth-Mars transit, whether outbound or return. Any questions on this chart? Hopefully it's clearing up a few questions. Alexander?
No, I'd forgotten to put down the hand. Thank you.
Hand was still up. Okay. Well, good questions so far, and I certainly invite more if something isn't clear or something occurs to you. So I'll go to the next chart. And make the observation that although illustrative, the example of the waypoint at minus 136.6 is kind of simple-minded. It's illustrative, but not really what we want. And the way we can quantify what we want is to define an optimality metric, which is going to be the sum of some hyperbolic I should say asymptotic velocity speeds, really, velocity magnitudes. So we're going to sum up 4 hyperbolic asymptote speeds as we go through these transits. And just to clarify what we mean here is an Earth to Mars transit will be composed of a leg A, which gets us from Earth to a waypoint, then a loiter period at the waypoint. And this study confined all loiters to be no less than 5 days. So we know we've got at least 5 days at the waypoint. And then a leg B, which goes from the waypoint to Mars. And then going the other way, we have leg C going from Mars to the waypoint, another waypoint loiter, again, no less than 5 days. And finally, a leg D that gets us from the waypoint back to Earth. And then we define the leg AB transit from Earth to Mars. Its sum of V infinities is going to be the A departure V infinity leaving Earth plus the V infinity arriving at the waypoint, then the departure from the waypoint, that V infinity, and finally the leg B arrival at Mars V infinity. So all these get summed up into a sum of V infinity for an AB transit, and we want to minimize that, obviously, to minimize the propulsion required to do the transit. Similarly, going from Mars to Earth, we have another sum of V infinity that deals with the leg C and leg D V infinities. Then we use the method of embedded trajectory grids to evaluate the sum of V infinity for thousands of leg AB or leg CD transits during using this two-leg 2LL Lambert processor. And we're going to use 5-day granularity, mainly because that was the minimum time we're going to insist on loitering at the waypoint. So we use 5-day granularity. And to break this down a little more so you have at least an understanding of what's going on if you aren't familiar with this embedded trajectory grids method. It's very similar to this near-Earth object, human spaceflight, accessible target study methodology. This is pronounced NATS, like the bug. NATS methodology, and here's a reference to the NATS website, which is institutionally maintained by JPL, and looks for minimum propulsion round trips between Earth and any known asteroid. And if the asteroid complies with a whole bunch of criteria, it's called NATS compliant. And that asteroid is one of, I think we have exceeded 6,100 compliant asteroids that effectively are more accessible than Mars is to a round trip from Earth over a 30-year period that I believe began in 2020. So if you depart between 2020 and 2050, using round numbers, for any of these 6,100 asteroids, they will be easier on your propulsion requirements than doing a round trip to Mars. But with 2LL processing, a round trip starting at Earth is not imposed. So I have this really nice degree of freedom where I can go from Earth or any other initial body to a second body and then on to a third body, all three of them being different. And that lets me probe leg AB or leg CD possibilities. And the compliancy limits for T2LL include things like maximum time of flight. I don't want to spend years because I'm trying to transport people. Minimum waypoint loiter, the 5 days. And of course, that is a very arbitrary quantity. Who knows what kind of infrastructure will actually support waypoints in the future. So it may be that we need a considerably longer minimum waypoint loiter, but 5 days is the baseline. And then maximum sum of V infinities for the transit, that's another criterion. So we step through an opposition season at these 5-day intervals and compute leg AC transits for various waypoint arrival dates. So, you could be at Earth starting on leg A, or you could be at Mars starting on leg C coming back to Earth. But at any rate, you compute the initial leg of the transit using various waypoint arrival dates at this five-day granularity. So you actually got two 5-day increments going on, the departure date and the arrival date. And for each compliant leg AC transit, you compute compliant leg BD trajectories. So the second leg in the transit is then computed for each compliant first leg. So you can see how this nested trajectory grid kind of almost explodes in the number of waypoints you're talking about, or I'm sorry, trajectories you're talking about. And then for each compliant, each of these compliant BD trajectories for various waypoint loiter times and arrival dates, I mean, it just explodes. And so in the end, we wind up identifying the compliant AB or CD transit with the minimum sum of V infinities during the entire 2-leg Lambert scan. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on as what is practical, what is most practical in computing these trajectories. Another nice feature of the 2LL processor is you can specify a kind of a dummy a dummy second leg that equates to a nonstop transit. So we can look at how these optimal 2-leg transits compare to contemporaneous, I won't say identical, but contemporaneous nonstop transits. Contemporaneous meaning in the same opposition season. So you do a similar scan and look at how did the nonstop transit work. So is that making sense to everyone? Any questions? Yes. I see a question.
Yeah, I had a slightly adjacent question to what we were talking about. When we talk about legs A and B, what parking orbits around Earth and Mars are we considering?
Very good question. I will defer the answer to later when we actually start talking about payload masses, because
Mhm.
that becomes very relevant then. But
All
for
right.
now, we're just going to, as simply as possible, define what we mean by an optimal trajectory. And then we'll go and assess those optimal trajectories, both nonstop and two-leg, for how much payload can we deliver, not only to the end leg, but also to the intermediate leg if we're talking a two-leg transit. So good question, and we will address it later. But for
Thank you.
optimality, we don't cloud the picture still further with how much mass can we deliver. Because remember, all the time there's this nasty problem lurking, which centers on the fact that Mars's orbit is not circular.
Yeah.
And that clouds how much payload you can deliver.
Hmm. Thank
So
you.
if there aren't further questions, let's go on and look at some of these optimal trajectories and see how that leads to further refinement of where the waypoints can be in the orbit we've selected based on its resonance. So here's our old naive waypoint at minus 136.6. So somewhere around in here in May of 2031, Mars and the waypoint and Earth are all lined up along the same radius vector from the sun. And what we find out right away is that that particular waypoint is overphased for Earth to Mars transits. And the reason I call it overphasing is, here's the sun, Earth's in green, Mars is in red, and here's our waypoint orbit for the first time shown heliocentrically in orange. And you can see it's about 20% farther from the sun than the Earth is, and very concentric, very circular. And so our leg A starts here in March 1st, 2031. Leg A goes out to the waypoint, spends 5 days there, and then leg B goes out to Mars. And notice, to get to Mars, I'm so far ahead of the game, I'm so overphased that I actually have to go outside the orbit of Mars. These ticks that you see annotated here with dates, those ticks are at 30-day intervals. So for about 1, 2, 3 months, I have to be outside the orbit of Mars, waiting for Mars to catch up to me. And that is what I call an overphase condition, and it gives you a propellant penalty versus what an less overphased condition with a waypoint that was clocked back in the clockwise direction against the motion of travel. And so even though this is the best, most optimal trajectory I could come up with in this time frame, in the 2031 time frame for this particular waypoint, it's the best, but there are other waypoint locations, other lambda 31 values for a waypoint in this opposition year that will give you significantly less propulsive burden. Is that another question from Alexander? Okay, all right, cool. Just polling here. So that's what I mean by an overphase condition. And here's what happens if you, by trial and error and a little bit of experience base, here's what happens when you make this lambda 31 more negative to offset the overphase condition here. Here's what you get. So here's 20 degrees more negative. And you can see the waypoint's way back here now. We start Earth departure a few months earlier in 2030, actually, in late 2030. And now we go out, meet up with the waypoint, spend our 5 days there, and then continue on to Mars. And look, it asymptotically almost approaches Mars. Nice tangential approach direction, never goes outside the orbit of Mars, never goes inside the orbit of Earth. So you can just tell from the plot that, yeah, this is much more optimal. And we'll look quantitatively at what the implications for that are, both in terms of V infinities and in terms of payload mass as we go through the presentation. And something similar happens with the leg CD plots. Now here's the naive approach. Again, we're using the original waypoint at minus 136.6. And we find this is underphased for Mars to Earth transits. And the reason I call it underphasing is that, okay, you depart Mars on leg C and you arrive at the waypoint, and then leg D has to go inside the orbit of Earth to catch up with it. And this is the optimal solution for this particular waypoint during this season, this opposition season, 2031 to basically 2031. And so you can tell just by inspection of the plot, this is not very optimized. So we go, and since we're underphased in this case, we want to actually increase the waypoints lambda 31, so it'll be less negative, and go to minus 116. And that's interesting, isn't it? It's another 20-degree jump does the job here. We have a leg C that looks reasonable, and then the leg D comes in and approaches Earth very tangentially. So both of these get satisfied. Both of these transit requirements get satisfied by lambda 31 values that are split apart from the opposition lambda 31. The return being advanced and the outbound being retarded from the opposition condition in 2031. But we've really only solved half the problem, haven't we? Because in 2033, there's an opportunity to go between Earth and Mars, but neither one of these waypoints is going to be on the right side of the solar system. They're going to be pretty much on the opposite side of the solar system from where the action is. So we then need to do a similar exercise for the 2033 opposition timeframe. And so when you get done with that, I won't belabor the point with illustrations. We'll have two optimally phased lambda 33 waypoints to support the interleaved transit starting circa 2033. And so we then wind up with a constellation of 4 waypoints, and they support all leg AB and leg CD transit opportunities. And I've tried to give you an idea how that works. You know, here's the first 2 that we saw developed in more detail. One for the outbound, one for the return. And then here are the opposition seasons, 2031, 2035, 2040. They're the same because they were optimized to the same opposition season. Then you go to the lambda 33, and you wind up with 2 more optimal longitudes for that particular opposition season. And then you can cover the interleaved years, the interleaved opposition years, so that you go on pretty much without limit with, in the studies scope, 0 velocity corrections. There's just, you're setting yourself an optimal condition for the 2031 season for outbound and return. And similarly in 2033, you optimize for that opposition season, and then wind up getting pretty much free of charge. Everything else just falls out because of the synodic resonance that you've established at the 1.195 AU radius of the orbit. So now we can look at just what havoc the Mars heliocentric distance due to Mars's eccentricity, reeks on the cost and the optimality. Let's look at the first line here. 2031, we're going to go outbound with the lambda minus 156. Is that right? Yeah. I get overwhelmed. Yeah, this is leg AB waypoint. So we are going outbound, and we have a sum V infinity that's minimal of 9.48 kilometers per second. That's the sum of all four of those asymptotic speeds. And then in italics, per the footnote, the italic value is the concurrent nonstop delta V. So you can see it's considerably less for the nonstop trajectory. Similarly, coming back from Mars with a leg CD in the 2031 opposition timeframe. And here's your waypoints, lambda 31. This costs 12 kilometers per second. And for the two-leg solution, optimal solution, and the optimal single leg is 7.2. So again, you're going to pay a price. Sometimes that price is really small, like in 2033. Look how similar the two delta V's are. You wind up getting out to Mars in this leg AB transit for just about what it would have cost you nonstop. Coming back though, in that same opposition time frame, you're going to pay almost twice the delta V to come back to two-leg versus nonstop. So you can see how that plays out over the entire synodic sequence of 15 years. Any questions on these data? Okay, so
yeah, I have one quick one. Maybe I'm crazy, but it seems to me one of the advantages of this waypoint is we'd have less delta V on the final leg going back to Earth or the final leg going to Mars, which would make we could maybe do an Earth orbit insertion rather than a direct entry.
That could be, or I'm a real fan of spacecraft reuse. So the transport that's doing the actual transits between waypoints and planets, I like the idea of finding some kind of infrastructure, which Gateway would be a real good example if it wasn't in the ridiculous orbit that they put it to support a little more than communicating with crews down at the South Pole.
There's other things too. You could have an artificial gravity space station in Earth somewhere where you could come to and you could recondition the crew for returning to Earth rather than submitting them to a direct entry after spending 3 years out there. And
with at best 1/3 G part of the time. I know that's the thing I constantly harp on about any of the infrastructures that do direct entries is that until we prove that people at reduced or 0 G for several years can take even brief periods of 10 G coming back from Mars, we have no business with those kinds of architectures.
And I agree with you. I don't see direct entry from a Mars mission. But it would be nice not to have 12 or 13 kilometers per second delta V required.
Exactly. Yeah. You could go out to the moon, rehab, or even get into low Earth orbit if you have that kind of performance. Do some rehab, and then come back. Yeah, because it's going to make 6 months or even a year on space station look like a picnic.
Oh yeah,
coming back from a Mars mission.
Right. Yeah. I agree. Thank you.
Well,
it still doesn't get after the galactic cosmic rays, but
no, it doesn't. Yeah, and I have other solutions for that. I have a lecture on an interplanetary transport that came out just before the Mars base camp that Lockheed Martin proposed, which is the only other architecture I've seen that puts the crew inside a bunch of propellant that you need anyway at arrival at an interplanetary destination. So you put the crew inside a huge propellant tank that provides more than just passive shielding from structure. It gives you all this propellant, which in the case of liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen especially, is very effective at reducing the flux of galactic cosmic radiation.
Yeah, I thought that would only be useful for solar particle radiation. You think that just the amount of propellant would stop or reduce galactic cosmic rays?
Yeah, because if you structure the tank properly, you could be talking meters of this material, right? Meters of liquid hydrogen around the crew. And see, that's where you really need it, I think, for a solar particle event, one that doesn't last months, one that lasts a few days, let's say. You can just direct like the aft of the spacecraft at the sun, and you get some pretty good shielding.
Some kind, because the people can live in a coffin for a day or two.
Right, and so because the solar emissions are so directional, you can solve the problem that way in a pinch. But GCR is ridiculous. It's isotropic. It comes from all directions. So you literally need to take the crew habitat, particularly where people are spending 8 to 10 hours off duty. You need to put that in a tank of some kind that's just going to shield you in all directions. So that's why I think Mars Base Camp is the most responsible interplanetary architecture I've seen for human transport.
That just has like the Mars orbit insertion propellant or the Earth orbit insertion.
Exactly. And see, the spin I put on it is, okay, while you're out in interplanetary space, you have this arrival propellant around you to slow down the radiation clock. And when you arrive at Mars, you arrive at not just empty Mars orbit, you arrive at, I like Deimos over Phobos any day for a number of reasons. And feel free to write me. I have a paper that I've submitted on that to the what is it, the decadal survey for planetary exploration, where you arrive at Deimos and you have a pre-emplaced subsurface habitat there. And that stops the radiation clock. You're meters below the regolith surface of Deimos. And Deimos makes an excellent observation point for Mars. It's almost an areosynchronous orbit. So you spend 2 days over a fixed point on Mars where you could have all kinds of robotic surrogates that you can do what I call low latency telepresence, where you are there because the light lag time is on the order of 1/10 of a second between Deimos and the surface of Mars. So you can wind up exploring Mars more efficiently than you could with boots on the ground. And for
that argument, Dan Lester at University of Texas advocated that one.
Excellent. Yes. Dan Lester, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Dan, and we participated in a study at Keck on that. Yeah. So did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I'm always looking for some way to do a propulsive capture back at Earth rather than
yeah, I've got papers on that as well.
For lots of reasons. Reusability is one, but the G loads is another.
Yeah, and in one paper that I have on that interplanetary transport, I run some real world trajectories, and coming back to Earth, you do in the history of astronautics, it would be the first retrograde translunar injection burn. As you get really close to the Earth, you do an O-berth maneuver that is slightly retrograde. I think it's on the order of 1 kilometer per second or less. And then that sends you out to the moon where you can rendezvous with some infrastructure that'll help the crew.
Do you remember Dennis Tito's study on lunar flyby in 2019?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I participated in that. That was fun.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
But it was ended up being useless because you spent all that time to get out there, and you circle around the Mars at the middle of the night. 20-minute view of the dark surface of Mars.
Yep, the Mars free return trajectory. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Well, if there aren't other questions, I'll continue on here. Oops, sounds like someone's asked a question.
I had one, but I think someone else was also trying to.
Yeah, I got a lot of feedback, but if that other person wants to try, we'll come back to you, Alexander.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just a hiccup.
Can you hear me, Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute myself, and that's where the feedback came from. But there's a question in the chat from Jenny. But give me a second.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. The question is, can you briefly explain the efficiency that would come with boots on the ground that we cannot provide through the exploration devices we can develop?
Well, I am not a boots on the ground fan, especially in a Mars context where we could ruin the most compelling reason to explore Mars, which is there extant life on Mars now? We could confound the result of that experiment by hopelessly contaminating Mars with human effluent. So I'm kind of not a fan of human boots on Mars in the first place. But what humans get you on Mars is, I think, two things. First of all, really, really rapid turnaround, in terms of seeing an opportunity for exploration and acting on it almost immediately. Now, almost immediately may entail a heck of a lot of overhead versus low latency telepresence, because you may have to pre-breathe oxygen for half a day, get your spacesuit ready, get it on, get out there. And then, of course, you're exposed to GCR and solar radiation the whole time you're out there, because the spacesuit has essentially zero shielding, which, the Martian atmosphere isn't going to give you either. So you're going to get exposed to radiation. And, Mark Watney probably had multiple forms of cancer by the time he got back, if you're the Martian kind of fan. Going out there every day just isn't in the cards. So, yeah, humans can respond very quickly, but they're also very fragile. And there's a lot of overhead to putting them actually at the scene in their spacesuits. A second thing humans can do is notice stuff that a poor robot can't. They're looking around all the time, humans are, at the scenery and whatnot, and they'll notice that dust devil over there that a rover only happens across by pure chance. Okay, so rapid turnaround and then just situation awareness is greater with humans. But I can magnify those advantages many times over by not insisting on 20th century modes of exploration, like boots on the ground. Okay, and telepresence, low latency telepresence in particular, is a huge opportunity to get so much more productivity out of our exploration. So hopefully I've answered your question, but I'm a terribly biased respondent. Okay, great. And Alexander, did you have another question at this point?
Yes, it was tangential to when you said arriving at Deimos as a great opportunity. So that brought up the following question, which ties in a little bit with what I'm researching right now. In your research, have you considered the legs A and C, or legs A and B, of departure and arrival to be essentially a three-body invariant manifold solution? So essentially using L2 to depart from Earth to the waypoint and arrive at L1 around Phobos, for
No, I
example?
didn't get near that sophisticated. All this stuff is just two-body patch conic kind of delta V's that
Okay,
you'll see subsequently. Yeah.
understood.
Okay.
Yeah, I was interested how you did the computations. Thank you.
Yep. So if there aren't any other questions, let's move on here to the next chart. And here's where I get into opening up that can of worms to compute payload masses. As Alexander's previous questions alluded to, that means you got to look at some other stuff. And what I did was, start assuming that I've got a propellant mass m sub p that can be replenished, and payload mass can be exchanged or augmented, this m sub y payload mass, during our 5-day waypoint loiter. Okay, that's the first assumption. Then I want to assume that transits will be flown by a vehicle that looks a lot like what Elon's let out about Starship's second stage, the actual Starship itself, not the heavy booster. This was in a tweet of his that I can't even find reproduced anymore, but he thought the inert mass of the second stage would be about 100,000 kilograms. The maximum total mass is still out there on the net, 1.3 million kilograms. That's everything loaded up, payload, propellant, and everything. A specific impulse of 380 seconds, so that would be like LOX methane. And that's the exhaust speed for what it's worth. Assume that this is really tough. This is kind of like a rubber starship. Assume the propellant mass m sub p and my, the payload mass, can be freely exchanged. So that's sort of like, the payload section of Starship can be expanded or contracted to make room for more or less propellant for the specific scenario you're trying to do, the specific transit you're trying to do. But that results in the constraint that the inert mass plus the propellant mass plus the payload mass will be the 1.3 million kilograms at a departure, and that we will use up all the propellant by the time we arrive at any leg. So that could be a 2-leg or a nonstop transit. And then assume Earth departures and arrivals, this was your question, Alexander, are from a circular orbit at height 185 kilometers, and Mars departure and arrival at a higher altitude, mainly because the atmosphere of Mars is more diffuse, so you got to go higher if you don't want to have a really short orbit lifetime. And then we're going to document some mission parameters for the nonstop as well as the 2-leg minimum sum of V infinity transits, originating at Earth and Mars during each opposition through the whole sequence of oppositions. And one new parameter we're going to introduce in documenting these missions is phase elapsed time. So that's time since the original departure at the end of each leg in the transit. So we're going to have 2 PETs for a 2-leg transit and then just 1 for the nonstop. And then we'll look at the maximum deliverable payload mass for these optimized minimum sum V infinity solutions at the end of each leg of the transit. And that's what we're going to present next. Any questions?
Are you able to hear me in the room here?
I can hear.
Excellent. This is Patrick from the audience in person. I have a question about the ISP that you have selected there. Are there any constraints or assumptions producing that 380 second figure?
Once again, I was trying to be kind of uniform. I had some inputs unofficially from NASA that they wanted to see how would what Elon is contemplating for the Starship's performance, how would it behave, what would be the consequences of a Starship turn loose on this particular infrastructure. And since it's the biggest anybody has on the drawing board, and in this case, it's even trying to fly, I figured, well, let me just be uniform in that, you know, the best information we have right now on a largely paper interplanetary vehicle. So that is just consistent with what was out there for Starship's LOX methane propulsion system.
But just to clarify, these are all Elon's numbers.
Yeah, from you know, Wikipedia, from X postings, you know, a lot of unofficial source material, but it's the best we got right now. And you know, nobody's flying humans in interplanetary space. They're not even flying them to the moon much anymore. So it's probably as good as anything else. But yes, very highly speculative, I would call them. Very preliminary.
Specific impulse is a big variable, big driver.
It
seems awfully optimistic. 380 seconds for a methane oxygen system.
Really, I'm surprised because, you know, that system is actually flying in the upper stage right now. And I would be surprised to see it much less than that. 400 or so is about the best the space shuttle could do. Is that
They shut up to break 450.
450? Yeah. Okay.
That was hydrogen and oxygen. It's a chemistry question. I certainly hope that is a realistic number, because ISP is a big variable.
Yeah.
If it's less, it's really going to wreck. It's really going to wreck your analysis fast if it turns out to be 40 seconds less.
Oh no! This is just pick something, and then more of the value I'm getting out of these computations based on these assumptions is more relative. You know, it's like how does the two-leg transit stack up against the nonstop transit? Those are the real questions I'm trying to answer, and I'm just documenting my assumptions. And if they're crazy, then so be it. We can redo the calculations. But I think they're reasonable, and all I would do is just go off and Google Starship and go to Wikipedia or whatever comes up and see what they've got for the upper stage, because this is in vacuo, not the big heavy booster you see lifting off from Boca Chica. Or maybe I should call it Starbase now. I don't know. They're applying for incorporation. So that's where the number comes from, and I think you should find it reasonable because it was something I dug up maybe a year ago and verified maybe a few months ago, and you know, based on some Starship flights, it ought to be pretty reasonable.
Yeah, that answered my question.
Okay. Thanks for asking.
Yeah,
Thanks for
connecting the case study.
Anyone else before we move on? Okay, so let's look at some of these numbers here. Now, this chart is for Earth to Mars minimum sum V infinity transits. So this is outbound transits only. So we're looking all, you know, leg A, B, or nonstop kind of transits. And 2031, well, if you're going nonstop, you're not going to deliver anything to the waypoint. So I just grade those out. You're going to arrive nonstop after 285 days, and you're going to be able to deliver about 142, 143 metric tons under all those assumptions. And that's what you deliver to Mars. Notice that in terms of time, it doesn't take that much longer, you know, a couple weeks longer to arrive there with a 5-day layover at a waypoint. You arrive at the waypoint after 145 days. So that's, you know, pretty much halfway, pretty nice. And then you can deliver at the waypoint 218 metric tons of cargo that you couldn't deliver at all if you were going nonstop. Yeah, it takes a little longer to get to Mars, but look what happens. You could deliver, if you delivered all this 218 metric tons at the waypoint, and then you backfilled all of that payload to the point where you only had enough prop to just barely get to that Mars parking orbit, you would deliver almost 300 metric tons to Mars parking orbit. That's double what you could with a nonstop. You keep working your way down through the various opposition years, and you see a kind of a bothersome trend regarding what you can deliver to Mars. And I think I have an explanation for it. I just haven't had time to run it to ground and verify it. But recall that when we optimized the Lambda 31 and Lambda 33 for the two outbound waypoints, the leg AB waypoints, we did it on those opposition years. And lo and behold, we really blow away the competition on those two opposition years. But as you work your way down into the off years, you get a little out of, you aren't able to do as well. The red indicates, oh, you didn't do as well as the nonstop. And I think it may be because I optimized for specific opposition years. And I got, in the ballpark, and occasionally I'd win out still on the off years. And then, of course, I left out the next opposition year after 2046, and I probably could have beat the nonstop pretty handily again that year, because I'm back into this region of Mars's orbit where I'm reaching Mars near perihelion again, where the waypoint was originally optimized. But that's just a hypothesis right now. It's still realistic in the sense that, all the assumptions I've documented worked through a whole 15-year sequence of oppositions. You're pretty competitive, and going the other way, even more so. This is the Mars to Earth transits. And again, you start out really well and then not quite as well, but you're making a comeback by the end versus the nonstops. Meanwhile, I'll emphasize again, you're delivering all this mass to the waypoint. And so anybody that's a fan of interplanetary commerce, you spread the joy a lot more this way than if you're just doing nonstop. And then to summarize all these data, here's what the sum of all the deliverables are over the 15-year Synodic sequence. So nonstop, nothing delivered to the waypoint. You got 1.2 million metric tons. Is that right? No, 1,200 metric tons, and a little more than that with the leg AB transit. But meanwhile, you delivered 1.3 metric ton, 1.3 million kilograms to the waypoint, and similarly going back to Earth with the leg CDs. So that led me last June. I think I actually did the work. I went and looked at the foremost patronized airlines at their websites as just an outsider booking travel from coast to coast in the United States. And I took anything they would book for me, any time of day. The only other restriction was that I would use the foremost patronized airports all of the airlines flew to on the West Coast and the East Coast. Okay, and those were the only restrictions. So I sort of had a, level playing field for these four airlines to compete on. And only 4% of the 29,000 odd bookings I could generate, West Coast, East Coast, only 4% of them were nonstop. The rest had at least one stop. And I think some airlines wouldn't let me book an itinerary if it had more than 3 stops or something like that. So I may actually have been not counting other nonstops that would have further reduced the 4%. There's something going on there that keeps these 4 airlines in business, some economic principle. And I think it means just what I was saying. If you insist on playing your games and transport using nonstop mode, you are missing out on a lot of business. And if you want an interplanetary commerce that's really viable, that's optimally making money and providing benefit, you will seek out ways of stopping at multiple places just to make money. And I think that's what's going to go on eventually in interplanetary transport, particularly when humans are involved, because then you have all this extra mass. That was another thing I neglected to say about human exploration of destinations like Mars, is that because humans are involved, instead of just putting your 1 metric ton rover down on the surface of Mars, you've got to put down probably at least 3 20 metric ton payloads, one of which will contain the humans that are going to be exploring. But 3 20 metric ton payloads, that means if you want to bring back 120 kilograms of Mars samples, it's noise level. You know, you've got all this lift capability that you can be using for bringing stuff home, whether it be interesting samples or maybe you find artifacts, who knows. But the fact remains that human exploration involves a lot of mass transport that purely robotic exploration does not. And because of that, we can really spread the joy commercially in its purest sense in interplanetary space. And, you know, I have this sort of perverted view of the future of interplanetary commerce colored by sci-fi like The Expanse. That's a great way to open your mind to the possibilities. Hopefully they'll turn out a little nicer than interplanetary warfare, but this is human nature we're trying to change. I don't know. So I've had a lot of people balk at this analogy between the waypoint enabled commerce and what goes on with airlines. And that's okay, but I'm waiting for somebody to say something concrete about it. It probably takes insight that only somebody familiar with an airline's business plan has, and I haven't spoken to anyone like that yet, but let me open up the possibility to anyone in this audience. If you have something concrete that you want to tell me either here or offline, my email address is there for you to use. I am all ears. I would like to see if this breaks down in any way. There's certainly strong arguments saying there's something analogous going on here. So let me know.
Well, I think it has something to do with most of the airlines use a hub philosophy. Southwest notably doesn't.
Yes.
So,
yep.
But I don't have insight into their business plans either. So
before I was unable to travel much overnight, I was a big Southwest patron, and yeah, they are very hard to book a transcontinental nonstop with. One time, I think I could fly nonstop from PDX. I live in Oregon to BWI in Baltimore, but I think that was a one-off and rapidly disappeared. So yeah, it would be interesting to see because there are a variety of strategies in play. And by the way, Southwest was one of the airlines I was playing with. United, American, and Delta were the others.
Hi, Dan. I can speak to this.
Okay, great.
My name is George Weinman. I'm a former airline CEO.
Oh, excellent.
The short answer, without getting into a lot of complex economics, is that when you have two legs and then travel between, so A, B, and C, and you have market from A to C and A to B and B to C, the market, the legs are basically self-sustaining on A to B and B to C. And when you're getting additional traffic from A to C, that is increasing your load factor above the load factor you would get from each of them independently. And you're making more money than you would from A to C, even though there's some market for that. There's also a cargo factor in some cases where, in the case of long haul, so for example, Asia to United States or North America, the airplanes can either fly full of fuel and make it nonstop, or they can fly with 2/3 of fuel, or less than 2/3 of fuel, and refill along the way and carry more cargo. So there's a trade-off in aircraft design where they can either fly max payload, max structural payload, or they can fly max fuel, but they can't fly max fuel and max structural payload. You have to trade off somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, you
see,
don't have rubber airplanes like I was talking about with Starship. Yeah.
So in that case, you'll see a lot of cargo planes fly from Asia to Anchorage, refuel, and then Anchorage to North America. When you have a lot of that going on, by the way, when you have dozens of planes flying from around Asia to someplace like Anchorage, and then dozens of planes from Anchorage to various points in North America, besides a fuel stop, it also becomes a transit hub stop. So what would be interesting in your analysis to consider is, at some point in the Martian economy, do you have, multiple places on Mars that need to be serviced, or multiple places in the outer solar system that need to be serviced, and a transit hub becomes essentially you bulk cargo to the transit spot and then smaller distribution from that spot. But that's getting into more complex, further out scenarios. To answer your short question, it really comes down to economics of leg AB and leg BC, and each of those have to be the majority of your business, and then the passengers going A to C are adding extra capacity or extra demand that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So,
and looking at some of the ads I've seen on the net at these websites, it looks like a lot of the nonstop, at least in the coast-to-coast context, the nonstop availability in flights is a sort of a goodwill gesture from the airlines to their loyal customers. Like, we can get you there nonstop as a greater convenience, and so we make these convenient flights regularly available.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a big market from coast to coast in the United States because of the demographics and economics of our country. But for an airline like Southwest, for some of those routes, it's not that much longer to make a stop. And the way Southwest always built their route network was, we're going to add destinations that on their own make sense. And then because there are travelers who can go now, daisy chain those things together, that, extra load factor they're capturing is gravy. So they could price it very aggressively. And that's why that model works. But there are a lot of people who don't want that. It also has to some degree a benefit of time zones. You really wouldn't want to make a stop at 3 a.m. Going, from East Coast to West Coast against the headwinds, but you don't necessarily mind so much if it's 1 p.m.
Yep.
So direction of flight and time of day and winds are a big factor in that analysis as well.
Very good point. Yeah, I had to think there's something analogous here because of the extra expense that you get each time you have to take off and land when you do one of those cycles, and yet it's still obviously profitable. So thank you so much for illuminating that.
It basically comes down to each leg is profitable on its own, and the extra demand of going cross country is extra benefit.
Yep, gravy.
Unless you're talking about cargo and long haul, in which case it's a load capacity issue.
And that's interesting too, that there are planes built for both strategies. And
sure.
That's great. Okay, thank you so much, George. Anyone else at this point? So we've got a half hour left, and really it's just cleanup, I think, at this point. I do want to talk a little bit about um, how waypoints get constructed. I see, was there something in chat there? Came up briefly? I guess not. I may have been seeing something else. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about waypoint construction, because in the paper I published, and there's a URL to get there, or you can ask me for a copy if you don't want to pay for one, if that's what it comes down to. I'm happy to supply like a preprint version, which actually I like better because it's to my editorial standards, not AIAA's. But one of the experiments I did in the original paper is to see how you could maybe jockey a naturally occurring waypoint or naturally occurring asteroid into the waypoint orbit with the right phase angle and all that stuff. So it's not good enough just to get the right orbit period. You then have to basically rendezvous and dock with a virtual waypoint that is going to be, this asteroid's new home in interplanetary space. Well, I took this asteroid 1996 XB27, and in the paper, it's reasonably sized, 100 to 245 meters, depending on its brightness, you can see how it weaves in and out of the orange waypoint orbit. I tried to actually jockey it into the waypoint orbit at the right lambda. I think this was a lambda 31. Yeah, lambda 31 case. And assuming that it was all Starship, all this mass associated with 245 diameter sphere was all rocket propellant, I consumed something like half the mass, just changing the orbit that little amount to get it into the orange at the right clock angle. And it's like, holy cow. So I don't really view naturally occurring asteroids as nascent waypoints, other than the fact that they represent sites of what I call proximal resource utilization. You may have heard the term in situ resource utilization. Well, that's not exactly what I'm advocating here, because I don't plan to do waypoint operations on naturally occurring asteroids at all, but I do plan to scavenge off those naturally occurring asteroids, especially ones in orbits that are so similar to where I want them to be. So using proximal resource utilization initially will be a very simple affair, because all I want is I'm going to transport from Earth some very complex systems that are hard to manufacture in interplanetary space, like habitats, avionics, communications gear, power systems maybe. All that stuff will come from Earth. But it won't be very much mass. We're talking in the order of maybe 100,000 kilograms, maybe a little more. And then I'll start scavenging from nearby naturally occurring asteroids. In the orbit class is called Amor asteroids. They don't cross the orbit of the Earth, and they're all outside the orbit of the Earth, the Amor asteroids. And initially, what we scavenge is going to be really low tech. It's just like shielding mass. Give me shielding mass. I don't want to transport that from Earth. I want to transport it from out here in a similar orbit to the waypoint. So give me a bunch of shielding mass that maybe I want to center it at the asteroid, and then transport the properly shaped, molded piece to the waypoint and affix it around the human habitat. Or maybe I'm creating a big, huge propellant storage tank, and I can do that by just centering some kind of cylindrical structure at the asteroid, and then bring just that piece back. So then the question becomes, okay, if I do that with 1996 XB27, what kind of payloads can I transport using the same assumptions I had before for the nonstop and two-leg transports between the planets. And so, yeah, the first thing I need to do is, this is a real eye test, even with the colors help, telling you the difference between the XB27 asteroid and the Waypoint. They're such similar orbits. Let's go from this heliocentric inertial frame to a waypoint-centered frame. So the origin is way off to the left in this diagram, and I'm just showing what the XB27 motion is with respect to the waypoint over time, over years. This coordinate system, anything to the right of the waypoint is ahead of it, leading it in solar orbit. And so this distance you see here, 190 million kilometers, is pretty much the minimum distance to the waypoint over time, beginning in 2031 and going all the way out to 2043, 2044 or so, well, 2043. And so each one of these loops is basically one orbit around the sun. And remember from that previous diagram that there's a little more, considerably, there was more eccentricity in the XB27 orbit than the perfectly circular waypoint orbit. So you see when you're above this zero line here, you are outside the waypoint orbit with XB27, and if you're below the zero, you're inside it. And so what naturally happens with orbit mechanics is as you go inside the waypoint orbit, XB27 tends to gain ground, and then as you go outside, it tends to lose ground. But because it goes outside the waypoint orbit by less than 10 million, less than 10 million kilometers, and goes inside it by more than 10 million kilometers, you wind up over the orbits gaining more and more. But I mean, you don't even double it over this period of a decade or so. You increase the lead, but you don't even double it. And so it's almost like this asteroid's just sitting out there over time waiting for you. Less than 7 million kilometers per year, the lead increases. Any questions on this so far? So this is our proximal resource utilization destination. And here's the outbound trip to it. So now we do see the origin. We're going to start at the waypoint. So here's the zero radially, and then along the orbit track, there's the 0 point. So you start at the waypoint, you apply a delta V of a little under 2 kilometers per second with your Starship. And then here you are going along at 30-day intervals with these time ticks. You go way inside the waypoint orbit and make up that 200 million kilometer lag, and then arrive at the waypoint in a sort of a loop that has you quartering into the waypoint and minimizes the delta V for both these impulses. So I need a little more to stop at the XB27. And here it is on one of those loops that you saw on the previous chart coming around during the transit. You can bring out to the waypoint using that rubberized Starship, you can bring out almost 300 metric tons of equipment, which might be a portable refinery on the first trip, might be other things on subsequent trips. But you need a little over a year to get out there. And then before you return, you have 242-day loiter at that point. And because of these times, I am not advocating doing this with humans. In the paper, I talk about at least semi-autonomous systems doing this prospecting and proximal resource utilization. But you can bring an awful lot of equipment out there. Just for reference, we have footnoted that the ISS mass is near 400 metric tons. So you brought 3/4 of an ISS mass out there. That could be a pretty sophisticated refinery with maybe some added, I don't know, 3D printing capability, so that you might do some limited manufacturing and other refining, such that after your 242-day loiter, you will have a lot of valuable resource to bring back. And here's the return trajectory. Again, it's optimally done if you depart going radially in about the same direction as you want to on the asteroid. So here you need just over 2 kilometers per second delta V, and then arriving back at the waypoint, only 1.5 kilometers per second. And there you can transport a little over 400 metric tons. So, and that takes 520 days. So including the loiter at the asteroid, you have a 3.3-year kind of round trip. And that's interesting, right? Because a given waypoint is going to see the need to potentially deliver a lot of propellant and other consumables, cargo, whatever, to a visiting vehicle going between Earth and Mars about every 4.25 years. So you can see that you could do one of these scavenging trips, proximal resource utilization trips, in a faster amount of time than you'll be visited and depleted by a visiting vehicle. Any questions on that concept? Comments?
I've got a fun suggestion that would be really neat to do. If you changed you had this waypoint, and you changed from chemical propulsion to thermal propulsion, and you had at the waypoint had the power plant, and beamed the thermal energy to vehicles approaching the waypoint and departing the waypoint. All you'd have to carry with you is some liquid hydrogen. No combustion on board, great ISP.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be really interesting.
It would, yeah.
And maybe you have a power plant like that in Mars orbit to power thermal devices and various places on the surface.
Cool, yeah. And of course, I always dream about things like nuclear thermal propulsion, that kind of thing.
Well, thermal doesn't have an adequate thrust to weight to do the job.
Right.
A real problem, but just thermal, if you have beamed thermal, then the reactor is stationary. It's at the waypoint, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, all that mass.
And so you don't have the nuclear thermal, just the engine thrust to weights are like 5. They're just insane. So it's because the reactor boys have spent their entire existence making ballast for submarines. But if you're interested, there's an expert, Kevin Parkin, on beamed thermal energy, and I'm sure he'd love to collaborate with you on something like that.
Sure. Give me his email address, or have him do an
I'll send you an
introduction.
email.
Okay.
I'd have fun participating in something like that too. It would be really interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Then you could have almost a continuous thrust on your way to the waypoint and on your way, and you could get a little artificial gravity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that'll slow my computations down. Continuous thrust is not trivial, but thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. And then here's another concept that the waypoints enable. During every tau, there's 39 to 51 days, again, because of Mars's eccentricity, it varies. But, on the order of 1 to 2 months period where Earth and Mars are so nearly on the opposite side of the sun that the sun's electromagnetic emissions render communications at least problematic. And you can't, use the bandwidth that you might normally enjoy to communicate. So it happens that at these points, all 4 of the waypoints, and I've plotted them here in different colors, all 4 of the waypoints are in what astronomers call quadrature, so that you could use any of them as a bent pipe relay. You know, at the start of the period, you could go from here on Earth to this waypoint to there on Mars and stay clear of the sun. So they become great relays. And then there's a final concept I'll leave you with, which I alluded to in the beginning, the idea that with a nonstop mission, you have only really one abort option once you get free and clear of the Earth, if you're headed outbound, or Mars, if you're headed inbound, and that is the end destination. You can abort to the end destination, but that could be really problematic in the event of a really nasty solar flare or some kind of mishap on board, a malfunction or something like that, and you need a time-critical abort option that isn't satisfied by just going on your planned trajectory. Like in this case, I have a waypoint that I'm nominally departing at, and then I'm going to arrive, here at Earth. So this is a leg D transit. And that's going to take some time here. You can see 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, almost 4 months to get to Earth. This particular scenario, and there's infinite numbers of them, but in this particular scenario, about 30 days after nominal departure, I can initiate a turnaround abort that gets me back to the waypoint in pretty short order, 80 days, with some extra propellant as well, if I'm willing to jettison all my payload. I jettison all my payload when the abort occurs just before you deviate from the nominal course. Come right back to the waypoint. And so you can get there in only 80 days, which is less than the nominal plan of 4 months, and still less than the probably 8 months that you'd have been out in interplanetary space on a non-stop trajectory. So it just opens up many more possibilities of crew survival and that kind of thing, particularly if this is recognized by the operators of the waypoint, and the waypoint is stocked with materials that would allow humans to survive there for a few years. Granted, it wouldn't be pretty from many human factors, but at least your radiation clock could be minimal in its rate of accumulating time exposure to radiation, and would potentially be the difference between loss of life and survival. So all I have left is my summary chart, which, just a quick review. Your waypoint loiter breaks up nonstop transport consumption into smaller staged segments. The 4 waypoints serve every transit opportunity. Each waypoint gets utilized every 4¼ years on average, without modifications to the waypoint orbit. So that's how they differ from cyclers. More cargo mass can be transported between Earth, Mars, and waypoints over time than nonstops. And mass for the construction or resupply can be obtained from adjacent near-Earth asteroids, which may also get swept up into this network of interplanetary commerce that waypoints enable. We've looked at the communications relay potential for waypoints, as well as their abort destination options. Down in the bottom is a URL to the article that was published in the Journal of Spacecraft and Rockets. So that's the presentation, and we have a little more time if there are more questions.
I'll just comment. I think your communications relay is probably your near-term most compelling starting point for this.
Yeah, you wouldn't need much infrastructure out there, would you? You know, you don't need radiation shielding or any of that kind of thing. Just some communications gear, power. So yeah, it could be up and running in short order.
Even with the moon, people are beginning to realize that they need, people, once they see the first high bandwidth communication, they expect that for everything. And so being able to have more than expected amount of communications capability is often a driver for new things. So
also space weather. I think if your initial outpost, it'd probably go a long way to just start monitoring and just find out just how common these dangerous events truly are. We may be scaring ourselves before we even go out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. The constellation of Waypoints pretty much has every angle of the sun in view. The aggregate composite picture is pretty much every view of the sun. And, that also leads to another concept that I'm still developing for planetary defense, that if you need to intercept and possibly disrupt a potentially hazardous asteroid or comet that's headed toward the Earth, you can do so from at least one of these waypoints. You might have to sacrifice one of your starships, one of your transports, but they pack a lot of mass. And if you're just going for disruption, you can kill a pretty large asteroid with one of these. They're moving at a relative speed of over 10 kilometers per second. You bring a 400 metric ton mass with you at that speed, you can disrupt asteroids on the order of or larger than 100 meters in diameter. So a city killer can be eliminated if you do it far enough ahead of time.
Well, at the very least, a spotter. You have outposts that can give you a better point of view.
Yeah, if you've got the instrumentation. I mean, it's kind of hard to beat James Webb Space Telescope, but maybe you got something out there for other reasons that can do that. Yeah. Yeah, in the case I looked at was that asteroid 2024 YR4 that was threatening Earth earlier this year. And now it's threatening the moon with impact. One of the waypoints could intercept that years ahead of time very nicely and disrupt it, given the size range we're talking about. And one of them even was too close to the point where the intercept would have occurred so close to the waypoint that you had to really worry about the waypoint surviving the debris field that would explode from the intercept. So you had too much of a good thing in terms of geometry. But yeah, both for surveillance and for diversion, planetary defense could benefit too. Anything else? Well, I want to thank the audience for a lot of really good engagement and ideas and commentary, as well as good questions.
I've got one last question for you, Dan.
Sure.
What about nuclear propulsion? Sorry if I missed it, if you were talking about that in the middle with the Starship discussion, but in the event of nuclear electric or nuclear thermal propulsion, which dramatically improves transit times, how do you see that benefiting or bypassing your ideas here?
Well, on the benefit side, the ISP assumption gets multiplied by a factor of maybe 4 or 5, and 2,000 seconds ISP, that kind of thing, maybe more if you're talking electric kind of propulsion. Let's see. It certainly doesn't rule out waypoints totally out of hand, because your ability to accelerate, in particularly the electric modes, is really limited. So you'd like to be targeting a waypoint because it doesn't entail buildup of such huge speed. See, I always hear these reduced transit times from greater propulsive capability. I always take them with a grain of salt, because to do that, you may have to compromise the payload mass you want to throw out there. And you have to kind of ask yourself, what do you do after you build up all that speed? Now I have to take it out to arrive at the destination without some kind of assisting spacecraft, like these cycler orbits require, some kind of assistant spacecraft that comes out and rendezvous with you as you're doing a hyperbolic flyby, because you're booming through that destination system so fast. So I sometimes think if we get more efficiency out of our propulsion, we're just going to increase our payload capacity with it more than, significantly reduce our transit time. But I don't know. It so depends on so many factors. But yeah, I've been an advocate of nuclear thermal propulsion for about 10 years now. Some of the capabilities that I've documented in Astronautica are really impressive. And if we ever get up around 2,000 seconds, I don't really care how we do it, but if we get around 2,000 seconds with decent thrust, and of course there are these hybrid systems as well, but if we can get decent thrust at that specific impulse, we're going to be able to do some amazing things. But we'll still be, until we get warp drive, we'll still be flying transits pretty, with humans and their massive payloads. We're going to be flying around the time of opposition. So it'll be interesting to see how this all evolves.
Thanks, Dan, for the interesting discussion.
You're welcome. Yep. Anyone else? I think we're about done. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll stop sharing and wish you all a good Saturday. I'm going to come back for at least one of the other sessions. Very popular day.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let's give a round of applause for great presentation. Yeah, we're still working on the planetary defense, likely June 28th, but I'll send you the confirmation.
Yeah, let me know if I'm going to be